Hi, my name is Nils, co-founder of Dinghy Studio, and welcome back to UX Design to Win in Business. As both a seasoned web developer and UI designer, I bridge the critical gap between design and development while leading our fully remote digital strategy team, helping organizations like yours to build sustainable solutions that transform user experience into business success, especially as AI reshapes how we interact with technology. If you're running a business with any digital presence in the EU, this episode might save you thousands in compliance cost and help you stay ahead of the curve. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest EU digital regulations and what they mean for you and for your business's bottom line. You'll learn about major accessibility law coming in 2025 that will affect about every professional website. So in our B2B context, that also means yours and ours, by the way. I'm not only pointing fingers. We'll reveal how big tech companies navigate these regulations and how you can do that too without their legal armies. Plus, we'll share a surprisingly simple 25-year-old technology that you could use to protect your mental health from algorithm overload. Whether you're a startup founder, digital product manager, website owner, or any other sort of business owner having some connection to digital spaces, understanding these EU regulations will save you headaches and resources later. At Dinghy Studio, we've seen too many clients caught off guard by regulations, scrambling to retrofit compliance at great expense. And today, we're helping you to avoid exactly this fate. As my co-founder Daniel would say, nothing here is legal advice, just our humble understanding of these regulations based on our work with our clients across various digital projects. If you're running a business in the EU, you've probably heard about this already, like it's been going through LinkedIn for a while now. And actually, this whole thing started a couple years back with our well-known friend, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Since then, the EU has been expanding on all of those policies to make the internet actually a more regulated but also safer place to do business. That's at least our take on it. There's a David and Goliath story playing out in European tech regulation, but it might not be what you think. We listened to Aura Sala speaking on the Financial Times Tectonic podcast about the tension and the rising tension between America and the EU. Let's unravel this a little bit. So one side of the story is that American tech giants are sort of complaining about the EU trying to regulate the entire internet, which comes out of the fact that if you run a digital platform, you run it once globally. Of course, you have adjustments for different markets, but Google is not going to run Google twice. So if the EU says, here are a bunch of regulations that you have to follow, well, then they sort of have to implement them to be able to do business in Europe. But this will, of course, reflect onto other countries as well, as they're not going to clone their product just for the EU. So there's some complaint about the EU trying to regulate the entire internet. But what Aura Sala is saying, that in her opinion, the EU is hindering European businesses to compete globally. And why she's saying that is that our tech bro friends at the giant companies like Meta and Google and so on, they all have an army of lawyers to combat all of these regulations, to work their way through, to be successful and run their business model as is, despite those regulations, or at least navigate them successfully. Many European startups, on the other hand, don't have this sort of resources. That's what she's saying, is the EU making it hard for your company to compete globally, just because you do have to prioritize implementing all of those EU regulations. I think it's an interesting take on what's happening, and I want to share a couple examples of recent rulings. So, for example, the Irish Data Protection Commission enforcement fined Meta 251 million last December for breaching personal data of 29 million Facebook users. I mean, it's 29 million Facebook users, but it's also a pretty hefty sum. So that's one example of a ruling that has been dished out recently. Then we have another case that's been kind of interesting that we call the fake report button in TikTok. And so that story goes, let's sum it up quickly. That story goes like this. There's a report button on TikTok videos, but when you press it, the accusation is nothing happens inside of TikTok. If you actually want to report a video to be offensive, or you want to report a video for whatever reason, there is an actual reporting feature in TikTok that gets taken seriously, but it's not the very obvious report button right in the UI of the app, but it's a very hidden away feature that you have to find and really have to go looking for if you wanted to report something. So to give you a little bit of context, of 201 videos reported in the cited study, only 12 were actually blocked. So TikTok's content moderation techniques, blocking words like kill, leading to workarounds like unalive. So that's a discussion that actually popularized the not word unalive, because people are trying to get around these automated content screening sessions that big social media platforms have to run through. And so the question I'd like to give into discussion is, what does all of this mean for your business? Like, these cases reveal both risk and opportunity in how to approach compliance. So Meta has been fined. TikTok apparently circumvented many of these regulations. And I'm going to talk about chances to actually maybe even not necessarily leverage regulations, but approach them in a much more productive way later on this podcast. But ponder this question a little bit. How do you feel about all of those EU regulations? My personal take is the internet is honestly due for some regulation. I think our industry has lived in a very unregulated way for the last 20 years compared to any other industry. Like, we were not good with standards. We're not good with reporting content breaches, of actually having regulations in place that would level out the playing field for all people running business on the internet. So I personally welcome the idea of making the internet a better place for everyone by protecting personal information, by, and this is a nice bridge to the next topic, making it mandatory for websites to be accessible so everyone can use the internet. And with the dawn of AI, we've been hearing about nothing else for the past 3 years, I know, but the point is there's also huge criticism on how large language models process data, on infringement of copyrights and stuff like that. So also the AI Act that's currently being rolled out in the EU is probably a positive signal. We just have to learn how to turn this into good business, I would say. On to the next topic. We spoke about this before on this podcast, and that is the European Accessibility Act. The European Accessibility Act has been around for a couple of years now. And for businesses in Germany, this means specifically that the, as we call it in German, the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz will come to effect in June 28th this year. And I'm a little afraid to tell you, but I have bad news. Bad news in that sense, as we originally thought that this was something that would apply mostly for e-commerce websites. But as we know now, and after talking to my friend Steffi Besselink a couple of weeks back about this as well, we know now that this basically includes all sorts of business websites, including selling services. So even our own website is included in this new law. And our first question was, well, if the law says that this counts for new but also updated websites, what exactly is the definition of an update? So if we have a running website, do we get some sort of grace period or something? It turns out we kind of don't, because every little update of a website, that means a new blog post on your website, is a website update. And by June 28th, if you change anything on your website, by the definition of the law, you will have to, with this website update, also comply with all of the regulations stated here. So this is a little bit of a bummer. On the other hand, just to come back to the potential that we have, this whole act of making your website more accessible yields a 20% increase in potential customer base, because that's how many people there are in the European Union who currently don't have straightforward access to web properties. So this is actually great news. And there's even more great news. So most of the issues that create or that render a website inaccessible for people with any sort of disability, usually technical fanciness added on top. So generally, if we follow how HTML was set up, like if we use HTML the right way and use the right semantics and have like a decent structure of it, then our website is in fact out of the box, just right off the gate, pretty accessible. So what we all have to look out for is all of the design decisions that we layered on top of this very basic HTML semantic structure. So very important things are, for example, color contrast, having like still respecting the right structure, and to make sure that people with poor vision can still read, that screen readers for people who can't see can read out your website in a productive and structured manner. So all these sorts of things are actually going to help for all of your other customers as well. Because if you want a website to be read to you because you're on a bicycle, for example, then that's also very cool if this works in a nice way and it doesn't tell you a whole lot of stuff that you don't want to hear. And generally, from our experience, making websites more accessible somehow has the side effect of the website being technically more resilient in the end. So it loads faster. It does get fewer errors for some reason. Like as soon as people get into accessibility, it seems like we pay more attention to the quality of our code, which in turn just makes your whole website much more sustainable, future-proof, and resilient all over. So here's a couple action steps for our listeners. If you're wondering now, what's the state of my website with regards to accessibility? I'm going to add the link to the show notes too. Go to wave.webaim.org. and just have your website checked out. It will come back with a report instantly, and you can gauge if you're anywhere near compliance, if you need serious help, or if it's maybe just a couple fixes you can do until end of June. Now, I promised before that we would talk about these regulations from the standpoint of how we can actually make those work for us a little bit. Work for us is maybe said a little bit too much. But so what we've been hearing and what we've been talking about in the context of UX design in general on this podcast is considering a challenge early on in the design process always makes the result better and reduces the pain of having to comply with this and that sort of regulation. So in the context of accessibility, of GDPR, of even integrating AI features into your product, this means don't do this thing where you build the entire feature and, well, if you're lucky, a week before the release, call your lawyer and say, can I do this? Is this fine? Or even worse, launch the feature and then get a fine because you didn't know that you were doing something wrong. In my conversation with our friend and lawyer, Steffi Besseling, a couple of weeks back, I'm also gonna link to that one in the show notes. We talked about exactly this conundrum. So our stance on good UX design has always been, you need to know what your customers want. And this is where the business value of UX research comes in. We save so much time by answering these questions as early on in the design process as possible. And what it always enabled us to do was to, first of all, build the product spot on to what the customer wants, what their customers want. And we never run into the situation where we launch a product, then everybody's unhappy and we have to rework. And that is because we did all of the consideration of the regulations, the boundaries, the wishes, the user journey definitions, like all of the criteria that go into shaping your digital product. We try to include that as early on in the design process as possible. And what Steffi is saying is that the same is true from the legal perspective. Lawyers are not just people who are trying to shut down your business. The opposite is the case. If you include the smart people that you probably already have on staff into feature design processes at the very beginning, that you don't have to ask the question, are we allowed to do this? But you can turn it around. And that is the key differentiator, how to make this successful. Instead of asking, are we allowed to do this that we already built and which is kind of finished now? Ask the question, can we make this work? How can we make this work? Include your legal staff into first concept, wireframing, kickoff meetings, stuff like that. Present what the premise of the feature is. Like, what are you trying to do? And get them in the room. Have them help you with the concept and the design of the entire feature and ask this question, how can we make this work? And you will see that turning this around from presenting them with an unchangeable reality into having their creative inputs flowing will make all the difference. Like, you will end up with a feature that is out of the box, GDPR compliant, accessible, like all of the compliance and regulations. You have all of this set out and you don't run the fear of being fined after you launched this whole thing. Also, think about it from a cost perspective. If you build your entire new website, put it online, then get fined, first of all, you got to pay the fine, which, as we saw before, at least for tech giants, can be quite substantial. Second of all, you will have the whole frustrating experience of having to rework whatever is wrong with your website now. So that might, in fact, alter a couple design decisions that you took during the concept phase. And three, now you got to pay people to actually implement all of these reworkings onto your website, versus you include people at the very beginning of the design phase and let them be creative. Let them be creative, come up with a solution to what you're trying to achieve and build the right product right out of the gate. This is going to be substantially cheaper than the first explained example. Before we conclude with this podcast, we want to get into something that is very dear to our hearts as designers, as human beings, as citizens of the EU, I will say. And that is the whole topic of algorithmic content versus human well-being. We all know that terms like doom scrolling and social media addiction and all of this sort of stuff have been dominating discussions in the recent years. And with the acquisition of Twitter being moved over to X and the removal of content moderation, Facebook is following the same thing. Like, algorithms in general are taking more and more of our attention span. And we're sort of being remote controlled by algorithms, which feels kind of wrong. But also, more and more studies show that the excessive screen time that we have, that our kids have, that we all sort of fall victim to, really don't play well with our overall well-being. So we want to use the chance in this podcast to remind everyone that there's, at the risk of sounding old, that there's a very old and established technology that is still around that can help you to curate a personal feed of news, but without the algorithmic madness. And so to look at this feature, let's have like a very, very quick look at the evolution of the internet. Like in the 90s, websites were really mostly made for reading. So it's really like a library-like model in to today's attention economy. As we all know by now, the internet is much richer, full of interaction, and meant to connect human beings to one of each other. But a lot of this change has also been driven by business models that exploit your personal data. We all know this. This is how algorithms are made. We all know that when Google acquired YouTube, that they had this 10x campaign to increase view time. And so I think we're all fairly aware of what drove this change. But how can we come back to a much calmer and much more enjoyable experience to use the internet for what it was originally intended for? And that is to distribute information, to let you customize what you want to see, how often you want to see it, and all of these good things. And that technology is called RSS. Really simple syndication is what this stands for. And it's basically like an email inbox. Like if you get newsletters to your email inbox, then you don't have to go to those websites. You just open your phone or your computer or wherever you read email and can have this information be presented to you in a chronological order. You can just read through it. And when you're done, then you're done. And the same thing, just a little bit better and without all of your personal emails entangled in your inbox. That is what RSS is. Most blogs on the internet today, if you just copy paste the URL of the Financial Times or Wired.com or any other huge blog, even every WordPress website on the website still has an RSS feed. So you literally just take the URL of your favorite website, copy paste it into your RSS reader, and it will go discover this RSS feed, as we call it. So from then on out, you can just open your RSS reader, browse through the different websites. You can view everything in a chronological order. And the best part about all of this is that you get to decide what's in your feed and not someone else doing this for you. Like, this is not algorithmic. You add the sites that you like into this app. And when you read everything, when you reach the end of the feed, then you literally reach the end of the feed. And I can tell you from all of the creators that I followed on Twitter back then, when they made the big move from Twitter onto Mastodon or into Blue Sky or Threads, something like this, then a shared experience that everybody surfaced, like what everybody was talking about when being on this platform for a little while, was the reminder that a feed can in fact have an end. It just shows you what you want to see and not some other stuff that the algorithm suggests to you. And it does have an end. And I can tell you, the feeling of having reached an end of inbox zero, so to say, in today's world is actually a very relieving experience. And because that is the case, I can only urge you, get any RSS reader that you like. There's one called InnoReader, NetNewsWire, Readwise Reader. Like, there's so many out there. Feedly, grab any one of those and start building your own RSS feed, because this is really such a calm experience to stay up to date and only with the stuff that you really value and not something that the algorithm is pushing on you. And so to conclude this podcast episode, I know we've been talking a lot about EU regulations since the beginning of the year. And I also know that it's, of course, not really a sexy topic to anyone, but I think we're talking about this so much because we're trying to embrace what all of these regulations dished out by the EU are trying to do. And I do believe that all of those regulations are trying to level the play field for everyone. And so If you want to use all of this to your advantage, I really believe that the companies that will thrive in the EU's regulated digital landscape aren't the ones fighting against the constraints, but those who are embracing those regulations in the long term. Like, those businesses are going to be the ones that have the best user experience in the end because they considered all the facts ahead of design. Those are the ones who will gain the most trust by their users because they're not constantly involved with lawsuits and who are actually not trying to steal your data, but who are working for their customers. And all of this sort of stuff will just lead to a better customer experience. And all of these topics are so important to us at Dinghy because we want to enable you and we want to help you to build not only your next digital thing, we want to help you build a sustainable digital product, a sustainable digital platform. And to do that and to be successful in the long run, we believe with all of our heart that we have to do this for our customers. There's no cheating. There's no cheating them. There's no hiding information. There is only be honest, be transparent, have a good value proposition, and establish trust with your customers. And if you do this, and if you kind of ooze this into everything that you do, then that means that your brand experience, your customer experience, and in your digital platforms, your users' experience of what you have to offer, of your service offering, will be so positive that you turn your customers into super fans that will always come back and that will always choose your organization out of a sea of competitors. And we all know that you're not alone. Like, we're not the only agency in Europe, but our customers stay with us for many, many years. And they do that because we're honest, we're open, we're sustainable. We do these things in the right way. And with this, I want to just urge you to take care of your mental health. And if you like, try and give RSS a chance because it's been around for a while. It will be around as long as email will be around. And at the risk of it sounding old, it's still awesome. And it gives you an end to your doom scrolling experience. With this, I want to thank you for listening and see you on the next one.